Oh. There we go. We'll just kick off and people trickling in can come in. So first of all, again, thank you for coming and joining our session on the open forum on the BN's definition of a basic income. My name is Lena. I am one of the volunteer hosts that is helping the Basic Income Earth Network World Congress in Glasgow. I'm here to host the session, but I'm going to actually pass off to Telemac. I'm just here in the background, and Neil is here as well, moderating the chat and helping us out with tech. We have a bit of housekeeping just to go through first. We will be recording the speaker's contributions, so please turn off your camera if you are not comfortable being filmed. Secondly, please make sure you are on mute unless you're speaking and invited to speak. This ensures that you're not cutting across our speakers or causing any issues for people who are hard of hearing who depend on those subtitles. And when you are talking, please speak slowly and clearly so the captions can pick up what you're saying. I'm going to leave the agenda to Telemac. I'm just going to say you can use the chat function on Whova. And we can raise things as they come up in there. You can upvote or anything you want that other people have asked as well for the speakers. We will have a roundup session for the whole day of the Congress today at 6:30 to 8 British time tonight. So there will be some more time for discussion there. So do join us for that if you haven't got your eye on another session. And if anyone does have anything specific that they need for this session to be accessible to them, please let me know. You can either unmute yourself now or put a note in the chat or private message myself or Neil Brown as well. I don't see anybody coming off mute, so we're going to roll ahead. I will let Telemac introduce what the subject of today's session is as well. And yeah, I think I'll just hand over to Telemac and Toru and Olaf, who will be speaking today. And before I do that quickly, we do have the mission statement. I'm going to put it in the chat so you can read it. There it is. So we believe that freedom from poverty and human security should be a basic human right. And we believe that basic income is the best method of transferring this right into a living reality. The time for basic income has come, so we're here to talk about how to make it happen. We can only achieve this through cooperation and collaboration. And our mission with this Congress was to bring together speakers and attendees from all over the world together to take basic income from an idea to a reality. So I hope you enjoy the session, and I'm going to hand over to Telemac now.
Thank you, Lena. So I'm going to start very briefly, just to say that so this is the first CBID open forum on BIEN's definition of basic income. So CBID is an official BIEN working group on the clarification of BIEN's definition of a basic income that was set up in 2019. So at the last Congress in Hyderabad by the GA, and Toru and I here are members of it. Also members are Annie Miller and Ali Mutlu Koyologlu, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry, Ali, if you're watching this video. and so basically we've been meeting every monthly since the last Congress, roughly every month, give or take a few world catastrophes and personal tragedies, and we've been to sort of try and set up a baseline to have discussions around the peaceful and constructive discussion around the question of the BIEN's definition of basic income. And so this is the first time that we actually try to have an open meeting and to open the conversation more broadly. And we thought that maybe it would be an interesting place to start would be to hear the testimony or the story of Olaf Michael Ostertag, who's here, who's a long-time basic income activist from Germany, who was head of the delegation head, who was one of the members of the, but he will give you more detail about this. He was one of the members of the delegation of European BIEN organization, or a basic income organization, BIEN affiliate, who went and asked for the modification of BIEN's definition in 2016. So Olaf will begin by telling us about his experience, his how he got to this negotiation, how they went, and the feedback he got since he got back. And then maybe Toru, who is also very much involved, will comment on it, and we'll open the discussion. As you've seen, I could probably speak for 2 hours, so now I'll shut up and try to leave Olaf and you talk more. Olaf.
Yes, thank you very much, Telemark. And now you announced something that I briefly will skip because you then said that we are discussing today the question of what is a full basic income. And from my experience in Seoul, I would go very quickly towards that because I think that's the discussion we should have today. And therefore, let's jump right into it. So, dear friends and activists, thank you very much for your interest in this discussion, what is a full basic income. My name is Olaf Michael Ostertag, and I have been sent alongside Ms. Gabriele Schmidt to represent the UBIE, the Unconditional Basic Income Europe movement, at the Bien Congress 2016 in Seoul, South Korea. Especially in Bien's General Assembly, we were supposed to advocate for an annex to the official criteria for a UBI recognized by Bien. The objective was then to introduce the so-called high enough criteria into Bien's official definition of a basic income. You see, in the European movement, there is little to no doubt that a basic income only qualifies to be called such if there is no need to accompany the basic income with other payments or services to lead a decent life and have the possibility to participate in society. Or, to use the exact phrasing from the UBIE website, and I quote, "The amount given should provide for a decent standard of living, one which meets society's social and cultural standards in the country concerned. It should prevent material poverty and provide the opportunity to participate in society and to live in dignity." End quote. So for me and many others, being from Europe, the high enough criteria is pretty much a given. On the other hand, it has never been a criteria that Bien recognized, so our discussions in Seoul in 2016 resulted in a mere clarification, adding periodic and cash payment to the definition, but ousting the high enough criteria from the official definition and carrying a motion instead that served two purposes: to appease the backers of the high enough criteria while satisfying the opponents at the same time. This motion reads, and again I quote, "A majority of members attending Bien's General Assembly meeting in Seoul on July 9th, 2016, agreed to support a basic income that is stable in size and frequency and high enough to be, in combination with other social services, part of a policy strategy to eliminate material poverty and enable the social and cultural participation of every individual. We oppose the replacement of social services or entitlements if that replacement worsens the situation of relatively disadvantaged, vulnerable, or lower income people." End quote. You may have detected here the shift to high enough in combination with other social services. So while UBIE still aims for a cash payment that also can buy all other social services, let's say even extra unemployment benefits, there is a widespread concern that introducing a basic income could do away with existing advanced welfare states. That's what's meant by worsening the situation. As we heard yesterday in the speech by Shara Razavi from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and other voices from the United Nations, there are many obstacles to a basic income as the ground floor for social security. Starting with a figure of 19 to 30% of a country's GDP that would be needed to fund the UBI, she stressed that the targeted social programs still seem more effective in reducing poverty than a basic income. And yet, there is still the promise of a basic income to extend the capacity of free choice for each individual. On Ruwa, there is the question, what slogan should the UBI movement put on the side of a bus? Carl Weidequist suggested his book title, The Power to Say No. And Peter Robinson said, basic income is freedom. Promising, isn't it? But those promises exactly are establishing the idea that the high enough criteria is key in keeping those promises. The suggestion of a word basic, to me, is that it would cover the basics. So if the amount is only $200 per month in the US for an adult, or 500 rupees in India, it does not cover the basic needs. So in my point of view, it does not deserve the basic adjective. It could be called an income grant or an unconditional income. Actually, downsizing UBI to UI or BIG to IG serves quite well in describing what that sort of payment is. But our discussion has rather taken the path of making a distinction between a full basic income and a partial basic income. The latter seems to me quite nonsensical. If it's partial, it's not basic, and if it's basic, it's not partial. So there are other distinctions around. From Guy Standing, I heard the comparison between a decent and a total basic income. He also referred to lower payments as modest, inadequate basic incomes, and he pointed out that we are on a road of improving things, and that even those inadequate basic incomes can make a huge difference, to which I am agreeing, and I'm all for that. But adequacy is the key point in keeping the promises of a basic income. To ease suffering is not equal to gaining freedom. It must be more than that. Or to put it that way, a full basic income cannot be inadequate. So let's say a full basic income is one that covers the basic needs, including the need of social participation, meaning taking part in social activities that traditionally come with a price tag. That brings us to the other discussion that we are going to have. Can a basic income be only a periodic cash payment, or could it also be given in kind? Or, like it is phrased on Hoover, are UBI and UBS adversaries or allies? Max Jendis writes there, quote, UBS isn't just about education and healthcare. Most already agree on providing those. It's also about transport, childcare, and housing, things that people can straightforwardly purchase with money from UBI. That kind of central planning, which would allocate families to homes based on lotteries, is antithetical to the freedom of UBI in my view, end quote. And yes, the freedom promise of UBI is challenged when traveling is supposed to be granted only in kind, not in cash. Traditionally, we in the UBIE would not say that the high enough criteria would be enough to buy a car, but to buy tickets for public transport. And if you could buy tickets, you could also choose to buy, let's say, a tuk-tuk. And yes, I was in Hyderabad too. And taking away that choice is cutting into the freedom promise of UBI. But the access to healthcare, as an opposing example, is organized in most countries through a system of insurance policies. So you could either be given the money to pay for a policy, or you could be given that very same policy for free. Either way, you are covered. So the UBI-UBS adversary thesis seems to be uncalled for here. To make a conclusion, could a full basic income include components in kind? Yes, of course. Could a full basic income rely completely on components in kind? No, never. Because a full basic income keeps the promise of expanding freedom, empowering people to say no, and even empowering them to interact as equals. With a full basic income, you are not afraid to attend a birthday party because you cannot afford a gift. You are not afraid to meet someone at a restaurant because you cannot pay for the bill. And of course, you are not afraid of taking medical care because you could not afford the costs. And if the latter part especially is not given in cash but in kind, as a universal basic service, that still would qualify as a full basic income because you are covered. To sum it up, if you can say about a basic income without blushing, you need not be afraid of anything because you are covered. That is a full basic income, in my point of view. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you so much. That was pretty great. again, I have to, I'm going to try to shut up as much as I can and let other people speak in this session. So Toru, do you have do you want to comment directly, or is there someone already that wants to add something? Carl, I'm sure you'd be willing to jump in. Toru, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's praise to hear people's voices, members' voices. So I don't want to add anything substantial, but just we haven't explained about what this working group is and the history of the past discussion. So I just go through the kind of history of the group. So in the 2019, in the General Assembly, there are limit. The chair and vice chair have asked the working group should be set up, of which Toria Mamori and Annie Mira will be leading members, and which other BN member will be able to join to discuss draft wording when you page or pages of the BN website to provide clarification on the definition of basic income. The wording to be amended and authorized by the executive committee before publication. The executive committee thanks Annie for her initiative to set up this working group. And arriving at this limit, there are some kind of history. And if my memory is not correct, Carl, please correct me. In the 2014, a proposal to change the description basic income was submitted to General Assembly in Montreal 2014. But because of the time pressure, the proposal was tabled. So for the GA in the Seoul 2016, they submitted again almost the same proposal. And this time it was proposed by the 5 regional affiliates and 17 members, life members. And but this time, not only that motion, another motion was proposed by Louise Haar. I think she was one of the co-chairs at the time. And both concerned the issue of adequacy. During the conference in Seoul, executive committee decided to have a workshop to discuss these important issues. And the workshop itself was chaired by me, but it's very limited time. It's only like 90 minutes or something. And I just make floor open to everyone want to speak. And then the real process of merging two motions to one, unified one, that kind of argument was happening during all the conference in the floor or some room and some dining place. But those occasions, Carl was a central figure to persuade all to have some compromise to have a more unified motion. And yes, and then finally the motion was proposed to General Assembly, and it was separated the 2 motions. First motion is about definition itself, and their adequacy characteristics are high enough were excluded because we cannot reach any consensus. It was quite what I would say, because both proposal something to say about adequacy. Only the wording is the main difference of wording. The other thing is the one Olaf was involved. It was high enough. It's clearly written in definition. But Louise has one. It's more, how to say, modest, and she has 2 options. One option is not include that adequacy statement in the definition, but it would be presented as BN support this type of basic income. That's option A. If option A was not preferred by the GA, she put the option B, that is a description of what is full basic income, what is partial basic income, and that full basic income should meet some sufficient enough to some standard of living. But yes, but in that case, it is in the Breeze's proposal. It should be written in our statute so that it's part of definition. So the A and B made some difference in the meaning on that. But anyway, so there are 2 motions, and I think each wording was already presented by Olaf, so I wouldn't repeat. But I owe the people who compromised at the time, because I couldn't keep promise I made there. That was because even the Louise's motion, it was supposed to be that separated part about adequacy is a part of the statute, so that we generally understand both that adequacy resolution motion for definition itself and the separated motion for that adequacy part, both will be in the definition page of basic income BN's website. And I promised it, and I think that's one of the important part of compromise. And I kept once I kept promise, and I put in that way in the definition page. But while after, for some reasons, that resolution was deleted, it's only remained as a news page I posted. So in the definition page, there are no mention about that adequacy things now. So I really apologize, I couldn't keep my promise. And since then, I thought after the problem is kind of solved, but in the next year, 2017, in Lisbon, Arimutru raised his voice about adding further characteristics related to definition. And 2019, Animira submitted a motion seconded by Arimutru, and that asks to clarify the definition. And that's lead chair and vice chair, Louise and Sarat, to ask Ani to withdraw the motion and lead a working group to discuss the issue. And that's why our group is coming in the force. And there are some discussion between us and the EC, and and also we wanted to have this open forum in Brisbane, but it's cancelled. So that this is actually the first occasion we can openly speak each other. So that's it.
Enno, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, when it comes to the idea of an unconditional or universal basic income, in German, the term is bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen, that is unconditional basic income. Then this is for me not a question of discussion. That's not how we like it. That's not preferences from this or that side. It is high enough to live from. That is absolutely clear. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. You just have to think about it. It is unconditional. It is not targeted to any section of the society. So the overwhelming debate about poverty is not part of the UBI discussion in the first point. It will give solutions for poor people, but that is not the point. It's not single mothers. It's not countries where the people are poor. It's not always the others. So the definition of a universal unconditional basic income has to come from the awareness of the idea. There is only one idea of the UBI, and there are many, many models. If it comes to implementation, you can do whatever you want, whatever is feasible, whatever you think is the best way to do. This is up to you. And what you like is up to you. There are many people sticking in the old systems and the old understanding of social benefits. And the UBI is now a new instrument for improving life of those in poverty. But that is definitely not the new idea. This is old stuff, and this is not inspiring the people. You have to be more careful to look to yourself and to feel and to see what is it, what makes the new point of unconditional basic income. That is that everybody, and it is not focused just on material need. It is the basic for life to reach month end. And the term modest means it's not for luxury. And if you are not naive looking to it, it has to be decided democratically by all the people. What is it high enough to live? By definition, you can say it's an adult living alone that's high enough to live for all that what was mentioned by you, Olaf. So, but this is for me not a question of discussion or debate. That is the idea, and an idea is something like a being, and that is what brings humanity and history of human beings further on, that there are always ideas, like democracy. And look to what is human right. Human right is a perception. That's not an intellectual construction. You cannot construct it. You can get the perception of humans as a being, and then you come to human rights. And unconditional basic income is in this tradition. It is an awareness of something what's real, what we have to create then. And again, the difference is so important. An idea is an idea, and that's not to discuss. And that's not the question of who has the authority to define it. Who has the authority to define that 3 and 3 is 6? It's like it is. So high enough to live from is absolutely inevitable part of it. If it is too low, there is no unconditionality. Then it's just a lie. That is like the experiment in Finland, 500 euro, and you stick in all the other programs, and the conditions are in their programs. So the idea is the idea, and that's clearly high enough to live from, not luxury, but that is enough for a decent life. The models to implement a basic income and what I prefer in that idea, that can be different. And I guess it will not come to a perfect real idea fitting UBI in the next 50 or 100 years. We will have steps and steps and so on. But we need to be clear about the difference between the idea, which is what is the polar star, and we are going in that direction, and we know it and we feel it, and the steps on the ground. So to make a distinction between this both is very important for me. Otherwise, it's always a mix up. And then we lose the idea of a basic income, of a universal basic income. And then it comes, and I see that this is happening now very, very strongly. It comes again to the old stuff of social benefits, thinking for other people what's good for the others, not the understanding that those people, all people, are asked to decide with us. All people decide about their lives. And the old attitude of social benefit and helping the poor is always deciding on them. So universal basic income is much, much broader than the narrow focus on poverty and all that stuff. And the second important point, I try to be brief now, is of course, social benefit security programs will decrease with an unconditional basic income because they are no longer necessary. A universal unconditional basic income is free and in addition. But if you look to what will happen in society, it is absolutely clear that the state will, and we are the state, the population will say, no, there is no longer need of many of those programs. And the employers will say, there is no longer the need to give you that amount of money as an income for your existence. So this is fine, you know, because the portion of payment for work and the portion of my decision, free income, that will change. There will be a smaller portion of money that is connected to the work, and a growing portion of the money that is connected just to me. That's an unconditional basic income. So many parts of the discussion to say, oh, we don't want to minimize social benefit programs, is for me that those people don't understand what an unconditional universal basic income is. It is not a prolonging of the old thinking. It is not a wishing thinking. That's what I want to say. And I think it's very important to make that clear. Otherwise, there is no longer strength in this idea.
Thank you, Enno. Maybe thank you also for the inspiring. Maybe your intervention in Toru made me realize that a bit more context was also maybe interesting. So as Olaf mentioned earlier, originally this roundtable, this open forum was not supposed to be an open forum, but a session on the question of what is a full basic income. So it was more supposed to be a selection of well, to invite people who had intervened in front of our group CBID to talk about this question. Yes, and but if maybe if Carl, okay, I said I would try and stay quiet. So maybe Carl, you can comment again, and I will jump in afterwards to give more context.
I'm in a coffee shop, so I don't know how well I can talk. Maybe I'll have to write my comments, but I strongly support what you could call a full or a livable universal basic income, but I don't think that should be in the definition of basic income. I have followed the debate in political theory on sufficientarianism, which is the idea that it's really highly important to get everybody up to a sufficient level, which is what we would call a livable level, and it's highly connected to the effort in political theory to define human needs. And it's really difficult to define exactly what is enough. There's no one point where there's an exact threshold. It's kind of you got an area where you're clearly below it, and then a gray area, and then an area where you're clearly above it. But this huge gray area makes sense. We think we're solving a problem when we say, okay, we're going to put this in the definition, but you actually create a new argument is how much is livable into that gray area. And you create problems. We have two programs that work exactly the same. But one is slightly below the threshold, one's slightly above, and it changes its name. Or you have a little bit of inflation, and the government doesn't index it to inflation. So it was a basic income, now it's not a basic income. It's more so, yes, we have this basic income program, and it fluctuates between being livable and not if you have these problems in it. And so I think you add a lot of confusion and difficulty if you try to incorporate the livable or full or sufficient aspect of basic income into UBI. Even though I want a very high UBI, I don't think it should be defined in that way, because the program works exactly the same no matter how high it is. And you get, and it would then fluctuate, and then it would cause divisions between, well, this level is sufficient, that level is sufficient. What is sufficient? Yours isn't really basic income. Yours isn't livable enough. And also livable connotates the idea that well, things get a little more, a little less livable as you go on. So I think it's really a mistake to try to incorporate this into the definition, even though this is one of the key goals that we're fighting for. It's one that is livable. It doesn't mean it needs to be the definition of one of the tools that we use to get there.
Thank you, Carl. So I have a lot of things to say again, but Walter, you're raising your hand, so go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Walter. Which is odd because you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay. Did anyone hear Walter? Nothing else?
No.
Is there a problem with your mic?
I cannot hear Walter.
No.
No.
If you want to try and join us with another device or
You could type in your comment into the chat.
Yes. Type it in the chat.
okay.
We can't hear you. That seems the microphone is switched off.
For the sake of time, maybe while Walter is figuring out, and if okay, Malcolm, if you'd like, while Walter is trying to reconnect.
While Walter is struggling with his computer. In 2017 at the Congress in Lisbon, I presented research on the definitions on all of BN's affiliated organizations' websites. It was a very interesting piece of research, and what I discovered was that there was a huge amount of agreement between all of those affiliated organizations' definitions. about almost everything except the amount that the basic income should be. And there I found substantial variety. Everything from no mention whatsoever to a substantial or subsistence level or decent living conditions and so on, a wide variety of possibilities. The conclusion of the research was therefore that BN ought not to include any mention of the amount in its definition. The reason for that was that if it did, then it would potentially disenfranchise those organizations that allowed a small basic income to be a basic income. Whereas if it didn't mention the issue at all, then all of the organizations could continue to belong to BM with integrity. I've put the full paper in the chat if anybody wants to have a look at particularly at the appendix, but also at the summary of the research at the end of the paper itself.
Okay, thank you very much, Malcolm. Walter, can you Walter, you're typing, it's still not working. Try again. Okay, what I could add is on commenting on Malcolm's paper. It seemed to me, but it would be, I need to go to look back, but it seemed to me that in the inquiry you made in the annex of your 2017 paper, looking at the definition of several affiliates, the impression I had was there was at least a very significant minority and probably even the majority that had some kind of reference to a threshold. And to a minimum threshold. So I think it's also this kind of but mainly there was 2 points I wanted to sort of make for the continuation of the discussion, maybe for a bit of structure. There's one thing with this notion of full and partial distinction. So I think here in our conversation about this question of the amount, we also really need to take into account the problem of the way of the history of this notion of full and partial. Because the thing is, the notion of a full basic income has actually had 2 historical meanings that are partially conflicting. One of them, actually the first one, when the expression was coined, it was in a report by the Dutch Administrative Authority 1 year before the creation of BN, and it defined a full basic income as high enough to replace all other state-provided cash transfers, including housing benefits and insurance transfers, like unemployment insurance. Yes. So this is one meaning, and this meaning of basic income as a full basic income as replacing all other state transfer is also the meaning that was used in the 2016 reports, Kela reports by so in Finland, to see if experiments could be made there. Okay? And the problem we have is that this meaning is quite different. This high enough to replace all other state transfer is quite different from the meaning that is being used by UBIE, which I can't copy here, but that Olaf quoted earlier, of providing a dignified, well, I'll quote it, a decent standard of living, which meets society cultural and cultural standards, and should prevent material poverty and provide the opportunity to participate in society and live in dignity. The real problem, it seems to me, though, is that these 2 meanings are not completely contradictory. They're only partially contradictory. So it's very likely that if you replaced all state-provided services, all of them, by a single cash transfer, it would be of a high enough amount to meet society's cultural standard and prevent material poverty. However, it's very debatable whether it's very debatable whether it would really ensure the goal of UBI activists, or whether it would really ensure what people envision when they want to put a basic income in place. And as a matter of fact, whether or not it would ensure this or not, as a matter of fact, it is definitely not what the people in UBIE and most basic income activists want. As was said by Olaf, giving several quotes, clearly the overwhelming majority of basic income activists When they think of basic income, they think of a goal that will be ensured by a combination of several basic income in cash and several schemes of different basic income in cash, maybe from carbon tax, maybe from income tax, maybe from X and Y, plus several basic services provided in kind, so basic income in kind, plus maybe some basic endowments or basic capital schemes. When you reach a certain age, you get some money, and plus maybe some other schemes. Yes? So this is clearly what the basic income movement and what most of basic income theory is about. Then I still think that it's important to have our narrow definition of a cash transfer. It's very useful. It's very useful for the debate. It's very useful for policy discussions. But I think, I'm coming out with it. So my opinion on this, that the only solution out of this would be to recognize that from the very beginning we've had two understanding of this notion of basic income, and we should recognize both, because Bien is supposed to be an organization that links together people interested in basic income, and it should link people interested in both meaning, both in the narrow policy one and in the broader one. Anyway, Enno and Carl, if other people that haven't spoken yet.
Does it work now?
It does.
Well, now you may have read what I said. So basically, I agree completely with what Malcolm and Carl have been saying. And apart from their arguments, I think, suppose, as I say in the chat, suppose you add adequate to the definition. Yeah. What would happen then is people will start discussing what does it mean, adequate, yeah, or whatever meaning, full or whatever. So I think the only advantage you have is that you now have this kind of nice idea put into definition, but you're not a step farther. The second thing which I want to say, what has never been discussed, I think, in none of the papers I've read on basic income, and I read many of them, what people should need to think about is what is the decision mechanism setting a level. Yeah, I think Otto kind of touched it when saying this should be democratically decided. Yeah, but suppose you would have a level put in a practical scheme. Yeah, you would need to know when this can be changed, who can change it? Is this Parliament? Is this some kind of scientific decision? I mean, there's a lot of discussion there, or a lot of problems which when you want into a practical scheme, you will have to decide a lot of these kind of matters. Yeah, and I think most people, when you say put adequate in the definition, it doesn't solve this kind of things. Yeah, and so that's why I would hesitate of putting this notion in a definition. Yeah, so that's all. But I think it only throws up much more problems at the end.
You're on mute.
I think it was Enno and then Carl.
Yeah.
But you Elena. Sorry.
Well, I even wouldn't agree with the term full basic income, because that starts a division of full and not full, and it becomes very complicated. Again, that's my statement. An unconditional basic income is not, it's not so important for me to make the definition. When we made the referendum, we wrote in the text of the referendum, high enough for a life in dignity and participating in society. And I think this is a mark everybody can deal with. And I also disagree that this would exclude those teams or whatever from Bien who start basic income on a lower level. But it would be clear that we are not lost in a debate where is the value of the unconditional basic income lost. And the value, of course, for me, I can say that just for me, it is nothing if it is not enough to live from, because that makes a freedom. And what you said, Telemark, there are other programs and most people want more and wish more. That's fine. You can wish a lot of things and you can argue for combinations of or whatever. But for me, the important point is to go straight on for an unconditional basic income. And the attitude that we could define so much, I think, deal carefully with it. So as that means we can say what we wish and what we want, but to become any success in unconditional basic income, for me, needs to really target an unconditional basic income and not so much more. What is around that, fine. And therefore, for me, the idea has to be strong and clear. And the idea is high enough to live from. Unconditional means for everybody, for the rich people, for the criminal people, for all those people we don't like at the first place. And what makes me a little bit sad and angry is that I see so many people, even maybe in the theme, avoid to make that step by themselves. So to think really this idea, to come in touch really with this idea. And this idea is not, it's not just nice. And it would be good if social programs and social benefits could be replaced up to the high of the unconditional basic income. What is needed above, of course, it is needed. And nobody ever talks about to abolish social security benefits for people who need more than unconditional basic income. But I think this mechanic or dynamic in society is also necessary to think. Otherwise, for me, it's just me, it seems to me naive, because it is about the basic income. We all have a basic income already. Otherwise, you are dead. So we have a basic income and we make the basic income unconditional. Whether this is income by employment or by whatever, the basic income becomes unconditional. That is the goal. And that would change the society. So again, for me, it's important to have one idea. And then everything else is different, what people can do or what they prefer and so on. But the idea has to be clear. That's my last comment.
Carl and Olaf.
Okay, I don't think the problematic history of the term full basic income means that we should reject the term. It's a little bit obscure, that history now, and overwhelmingly people who are using the term full basic income now are talking about a basic income large enough to live on. And so even with that ambiguity in the past, they're like, but we could call it livable basic income or something else. But I still think it's best to define basic income is one thing, and if you want to say it's high enough to live on, you put an adjective in front of it, whether it's full, livable, adequate, whatever adjective you want. It should be something else. Partly because that also makes it consistent with how we define things. We tend to define things. We don't define a pension as large enough to live on. Everybody wants a pension that's large enough to live on, but we recognize a smaller pension is still a pension. The term income, everybody on their job wants an income that's large enough to live on. We all want a livable income, but some jobs don't pay a livable income. It's still an income. And one thing after another, one thing after another is all defined this way. And I think it's important to keep it consistent with that way. And it's also, it cuts us off if we say it's only a basic income. If it's this large, it cuts them off from the experience in Namibia and the experience in India and the experience that's going on right now, if give directly in Kenya, where you can't really call these things livable basic income, but they do tell us a lot about what an unconditional basic income is going to do when we put it in practice. And I think we need to envision these things as a basic income, even if it's not as high as we want. And it's very likely that when basic income is introduced, it's going to be introduced at a level smaller than we want, and will then be eventually ratcheted up to more like what we want. We need to be, we need to be open to that a partial basic income, as long as it's not replacing the rest of the welfare state, would be a huge step in the right direction, as the Alaska dividend was for Alaska. And we need to bring these things, we need to keep these things in the definition of basic income.
Olaf?
Yes, and I'd like to respond directly to Carl. Carl, you yourself coined the phrase, the power to say no. And you even said that we should print this on the side of a bus. What is a basic income? A basic income is the power to say no. So while I'm all with you and following you on the Kenya and Namibia and India experiments or pilots, and I can say, yes, that's the unconditionality. That's very new and it's very improving the lives of many, many people. We're not there yet at the promise of the power to say no, because all these people do not have the power to say no to everything else yet. And yet that's the goal of the basic income, as you defined it. So I really would like how do we avoid losing the final goal of gaining freedom and the power to say no when we say these partial basic incomes are so huge steps forward that can be called the same as a basic income that is livable. I think we do need to make a clear distinction between these first steps and the livable basic income. Let's call it what you want, but you said the goal is the gain power to say no. So how do we do this, and how do we not lose our path to this final goal?
Well, he spoke directly to me, so can I just jump in and respond here? I think the way to do it, the way I have attempted to do it in my work, is to say, this is what basic income is. And this is the type of basic income that I support, one that is highly livable, one that is sufficient to meet your basic needs. Maybe in some of my work I've confused that, I don't know. But that's the way I intend to do it. And I think that can be very clear. When somebody says, we need to spend money on the court system so people can have their disputes settled. Well, if you don't spend enough on the court system, people won't have their disputes settled. But you still recognize that as you have a court system, even if it's inadequately financed to do the job that it's meant to do. It's still a court system. It's still a minimum wage if it's too low to live on. So I think we can be clear about the kind of UBI we're for without saying it's not a UBI if it's not this. And I also think it's the clearest way to talk about it.
May I respond directly to that? So why then is it called an unconditional basic income? Because it clearly is an income and it clearly has the unconditionality. So it would not need the phrase basic or the other way around. If it says basic means unconditional, then it would need the certification of unconditional basic income. So these are two phrases that are attached to the word income here. And in your words, I think they do both mean the same thing. In my ear, they do not mean the same thing.
Okay, I think Toru's remark will
yeah, I better.
So, yes.
Yeah, well, actually, my question is related to this Olaf Carl conversation. So let me jump in. Well, I understand what Carl is saying, but as far as I understand, you wrote in the book, it's different. You define the basic income guarantee. It consists of both negative income tax and basic income. And that in a definition, you said, BIG is a government provided unconditional assurance that everyone has a regular cash income large enough to meet their basic need. So you put that threshold concept in your definition. And it's the same with the book series. You were the series editor in the Paragraph Macmillan, the biggest English book series on the basic income. You and your co-editors put almost similar wording with a threshold. Also the US BIG, where you are the main founder of the organization, it's also put similar wording. if you really think those kind of threshold concept in the definition, why you choose to put it in? That's my question.
I think you've caught me being unclear. I guess I've been unclear.
Maybe
I don't know.
I have another
yeah.
question for you, Carl. So maybe I'll add one more question, then we'll see if you can, I'll react more to your words from before. When you had this thing of the notion of full basic income as high enough to replace all other states transfer as being a thing of the past. Yes.
No, please, just to correct that. It is not my wish. It is that I see what will happen. What will happen is if social programs, social benefit payments are no longer necessary because they are covered up by the amount of an unconditional basic income, they will be abolished.
Okay, but that wasn't, I wasn't talking directly to you, but that's a very good and excellent clarification. Thank you, and sorry for if you do this for you, but this is the point. So most basic income activists, they only favor the replacement of those benefits that would be directly replaced by it. I mean, without making anyone worse off. But the thing is, there is another understanding of full basic income. When the WRR, when the Dutch agency in 1985 made its report, it defined basic income as high enough to replace all states transfer, and it said we shouldn't go there. And the thing is, this is not a thing in the past. The 2016 report for the Finnish experiment is not a thing of the past. It's very recent. And in between, there was the 2006 book by Charles Murray, his plan to replace the welfare state. I mean, that's the explicit subtitle of his book, In Our Hand. So this is. And
that's wrong. That's totally wrong. That is the wrong direction. That's the wrong way around. But we have to make the distinction.
Please let me, as a typical basic income activist, you think this is completely wrong. But my point was more this, as to your remark, Carl, this is not a thing of the past. This is something that exists. And the problem that we have is that these two meanings, they are not completely contradictory. And the problem we have is that also these proposals of full basic income in both meanings, or in the meanings that is used by administrative authority, they scare a lot of social protection activists. And they scare even a lot of basic income supporters, as Enno's reaction showed. And one person that couldn't be here today with us because of personal hardship, but was supposed to intervene in this panel, is Vida Panic, who made a great paper in 2006, actually, in the basic income studies, and two more since, on the notion that why cash violates centrality, and why providing the objective, what I call the objective of the broader understanding of basic income only by a single cash transfer would not work or pose a lot of problem. I think this is something that we really should take into account. And it's not it's something that we can dismiss so easily. And further, the other thing is as we have this full and partial distinction. Do you want to reply, Carl? Because otherwise, I'm gonna go.
Well, I had two things. One is, well, if full isn't good, then let's say livable. But I want to know, like, who is really still using full in this sense?
Administrative authority.
The what authority?
The Dutch, and I mean, if you were okay, the next time we have a country that is trying to make a report, would you think it would not look at the 2016 report to the Finnish experiment, or the report? And actually, the thing is, Walter can confirm or infirm me on this, but as we were talking earlier on this subject, he was telling me that for someone like Mimi Parker, the two, she was in favor of a full basic income in both meaning of the word. And it's more, and it's not so much that people, that people would argue for the full basic income. Is the problem that we have is more that the scare of the social protection movement, the fear of the social protection movement, is of those proposals that would replace the welfare state. Actually, it seems to me that when on this thing of the full partial distinction, it seemed to me that one way that we could reuse it in a more productive way would be if we recognize that there is two understanding of basic income. a narrow one, as in the cash transfer with the 6 criteria, and a broader one, as in the goal that that basic income activists strive for, then we could say, okay, in the narrow meaning of basic income, a partial basic income is a policy that is partially a basic income, so that fulfills some of our 6 criteria. And then we could talk of all of the public benefit systems, all of the cash transfer that exists today, saying, okay, how many of the criteria of basic income do they match? Actually, this is something that Ali Mutlu, who is also, who's a very active activist, or very prominent activist, he's been promoting this notion of scorecards. He's actually promoting it in a parallel session right now on how to evaluate basic income proposals with scorecards. So I think if we took this approach, saying, okay, what are partial basic incomes in the narrow meaning of the term? There are those policies that meet some of the criteria that define basic income. And then if we, in the broader meaning of the, guaranteeing the unconditionally and universally the material means of individual autonomy, we could say that a lot of policies contribute to this meaning, and we could say that a lot of welfare system around the world, because they provide basic income in kind, because they provide some basic income schemes, universal pension schemes, universal child benefits, they partially fulfill this. And it seems to me that this would be a much more productive approach, a much more towards the social protection movement in general than the way this full partial distinction is being used today, and this attempt to include in one single definition this criteria of sufficiency. Sorry.
Could I briefly say something just on the subject? I mean, you mentioned Mimi Parker, yeah. So I think in the beginning, in the 1980s. A lot of people thinking about basic income really thought about a full basic income in the 2 senses of the word. Yeah, I read one sentence from the paper Mimi Parker produced in 1988 at the second Bien conference. Yeah, she tells what kind of costings she has made. Yeah, and then she says, none is a full basic income, by which I mean a basic income that is sufficient to replace existing benefits, all existing benefits. So I think most of the people started then really from the dream that you could replace the whole of the welfare state system by a basic income and have a sufficient. The only thing she excluded, yeah, was housing, because there was a very big problem to include that in housing. Now, so that's one point in terms of history, but I understand very well Enno, yeah? And I agree very much with the way he's putting this. Now, Telemaque said, if you look at the nitty-gritty thing and at the practical problems, you will lose a lot of basic income advocates, eh, who want a big dream. But the other way around is also the case. I've spoken many times to grassroots people, yeah, trying to explain what basic income was. And many times I've tried the following thing. Before starting to speak, I asked who was in favor of basic income. Yeah. After my speak, and I'm a proponent, you know, I advocated it for 20, 30 years now. But I try to explain what would happen when you wanted to put it in place. Yeah. After that speech, I asked again how many people are in favor. And in most cases, the numbers diminuted. Yeah. Because it's only at that time when people see that the big smile, the big dream is not something you can do from today to tomorrow, that it will not be in one time there, that you will have a transition period, that a lot of these kind of things will not from the beginning. I mean, at the end, I tried for myself to say, what I'm doing is first I promise them a very bright car, yeah, which will work perfectly on solar energy and so on. And afterwards, I have to say, I only can deliver them now, but without the wheels, without the motor, without this and that. Yeah, but it will still be a brilliant car if we have it completely full. And so it's not only advocates you will lose if you go the other way around. Also, a lot of the ordinary people you may be able to convince when you start by looking at very practical problems. So.
Okay. I don't know if all the people in 1986 wanted to replace the whole welfare state. I'm really, I'm really not sure about this. But just so we have at least 3 more interventions. But maybe if it's okay with you, Carl and Enno, since Timothy has not spoken at all, could you?
Thank you. Yeah. So, Carl, so earlier today, I want to relate this to the discussion with the group of Canadians who wanted the idea of a UBI to include something that was income tested, and you were arguing against that in part because it wouldn't add even though you said that, okay, that would be a good sort of starting point maybe, and it may be better than what we have now, and it can be good as a road to a UBI. It's not what we're really wanting with the UBI, and it will bring about other problems, and that kind of dilutes the ideas that we're trying to promote with the with this idea of a UBI. And it seems to me you can make the same argument about the definition that you're making now about wanting universal basic income to include a partial basic income. You were saying that those people could use a different term. Well, if you're for a partial basic income, you could just call it either just a universal income or just a universal partial income or something like that. And that way it wouldn't dilute the idea of having it being basic, and which I think Olaf made a compelling case to me that the adjective basic has to be at least sufficitarian.
So
Can I respond? Okay, I think the term basic is meant to mean base level. I said this in the history session last time, and some of the people studying the history agreed with me. It doesn't necessarily mean basic needs, but it distinguishes a universal income from a universal basic income. It's a base level income. A universal income could be understood to mean everybody's going to get the same income regardless of how much they work. Universal income might be understood that way, as from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking just about a base level income. So I think it's basic in this sense. And I do agree that whenever you have a set of a couple of things, you need to be able to distinguish them somehow. So I think we need one word for the set of UBI and NIT, and I've suggested basic income guarantee, as a lot of people at US Big have. But it could be something else. It could be guaranteed income, whatever. You have something for the set and then something for the things, the elements in the set. So NIT and universal basic income. Then you know that these, if you want to refer to the set, you use a term basic income guarantee. If you want to refer to this thing in the set or that thing in the set, you refer to NIT or UBI. Now, as far as a UBI getting larger and smaller, well, it's the same thing, only just a little bit larger, a little bit smaller. It's still a set. I mean, you could think of a set of basic income could be from 0 to infinity. We don't need a name for each of those things, but I think we do need a name to distinguish between a full or livable UBI and one that's not. But I think that's best done because it's the same thing, just getting larger, smaller. We just need to say, well, how livable is it? Is this a truly livable UBI? I think that's the best way to distinguish, because a basic income, just a few percentage points of inflation could turn a livable basic income into an unlivable basic income. Whereas it's an enormous change in administration to turn a negative income tax into a true universal basic income. And so I think we need something universal basic income has been long defined as this thing in this set and distinct from NIT. Start messing with that now, then we would still need another term for true universal basic income if we'd have allowed NIT, because then that would just simply become the term for the set. Then what do we need for this thing in the set? Whereas we already have terms when the set is a big UBI and a small UBI. We have words for that.
Just to respond back to my analogy, you were saying that it's the small and the large is the same thing. It's just a continuum, but I think that's actually, working in the tax industry, I think that's true about any sort of basic income, particularly if it's funded by a progressive income tax. And then if you're talking about that versus an income tested credit, all you're doing is just arguing about where the larger where the larger marginal tax rate should be and how much the marginal tax rate should be, and that could be seen as just a continuum as well.
Okay, maybe Enno, and then we'll try to wrap up. Thank you, Timothy. So I don't know if Carl you want to, but maybe afterwards you can, depending on
the majority of people receiving an unconditional basic income are not poor people. I'm missing that. So the majority is not poor people. It is totally nonsense when people say the whole social benefit system or social solidarity is abolished with an unconditional basic income. People can say that, but it makes no sense, because those who need more do need more, and even Milton Friedman knew that. So the point for me again is basic income means that is the basic of an income, and if there is not that level of a livable income, the consequences of a lower unconditional basic income are very negatively. I can give you an elaboration about how I could misuse an unconditional basic income by making it lower than the people need. Then I can decrease wages and so on, and that will happen. So don't be naive. We are living in the world in which we are living. If people have a basic income, and think about, we have only tests yet. We have only tests. There is no result what happens in a society, what happens in a whole nation. These are only tests, and we have results of good results when we check it in Namibia or wherever. If there's a nation, if it is huge, of course wages will fall, of course, no doubt. Look to the history what happened. And of course, social benefit programs will fall. If the people are not free by a high enough basic income, it becomes worse. And that's my what I'm afraid of. An unconditional basic income can be used to enslave the people even much more than we are today, and makes the situation worse for those who has no power than today. And this is introduced when we are not clear about that it has to be, of course, high enough to live from, and not in need, not to show the people, oh, you are bad, you have a very low income. If this idea isn't clear, then an unconditional basic income is a tool to split society and to bring people really down in power and a few one not. It is a new and huge idea. And it's not, it's heavily, it's strong.
Okay, so I would disagree very strongly with this notion that a small basic income would make people worse off and allow to lower wages, because if it's completely unconditional, people would have more ways of negotiating. But I'm abusing my my host privilege here completely. So Olaf raised your hand, and Timothy, are you still raising your hand because you want to speak, or Timothy? Or is it just that you didn't lower it earlier? Okay, sorry. So Olaf, go ahead.
Well, I think we had already agreed on that Bien opposes every scheme that introduces such a basic income that does away with other social services. So I think that's the key to find common ground again, because we're not seeing any common ground very nearby, I think, in this discussion. But the unconditionality of all the pilots introduced, those made a huge difference about how people thought and how people could steer through their calamities. And this makes the thing, as Carl said, the same thing, even if it's low or it's higher. But the worsening of the situation is a real threat and a real fear. I would like to back up Anna about that. But I thought we already agreed on that we all, as activists and in Vienna, opposed these kinds of schemes. So if we are agreeing on that, I think we could also agree on defining the road that Guy Standing talked about yesterday. So these pilots served a purpose, and the unconditionality is really key to what's new about this idea. And so if the road leads us to a path where the basic income reaches the height that is needed to be fully in the capacity of saying no and living your life, then I think we can all find common ground on the combination. Yes, it's the unconditionality what's really new, and this is what we have to back, and this is what we have to introduce to all the other people that are not yet talking about this. So let's not lose common ground here. Let's focus on the task of having a definition that we all can agree on.
Okay, so that's a good word of conclusion. All I can add is that, as everyone noticed, this is only the sort of the beginning of the conversation, really. So this was the first CBID open forum. I think it went pretty well. I hope you felt that way too. Our next, Tori, do you want to introduce? Do you want to conclude? Maybe. And
yeah, just is there a plenary tomorrow? I forgot the time and the related topic, and also after the Congress, we would like to have similar online meeting like this session, and the next one planned to 8 AM GMT on Monday, 11th of October, to discuss similar things. And we intend to hold this regularly, perhaps quarterly, at least until next year's BN's Congress. So I hope some of you to see there again. And thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much. And there's also a dedicated email address. So if you have a project or remarks or things you want to about Bien's definition of basic income or the definition of basic income, or if you find some resources, it's a collective address, CBID Bien, without any punctuation sign in between, and all in small lower cases, at gmail.com. So the address is on the description of today's meeting. So yes, with this, thank you very much for your time and contributions and attention, and we look forward to carrying on the discussion. And thank you so much, Lena. Sorry for.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Telemark, am I good to end the meeting?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'll see you all at the conference. Lovely to meet you all.
Was it interesting for you? Did you find the talk interesting at all?
Of course. Yes. I have many questions.
Too many basic income nerds.
Oh, I mean, Scottish politics is full of them. That's what we do. This is just a Zoom instead of a pub. So
okay.
Yeah, this is a group of people who are really into this. As you can see, we're getting into the little
absolutely
details.
exactly the right place. It's really interesting to hear it all, actually.
Yeah, and it's been a lovely kind of continuation of the last, I don't know if you can speak to this as well, Neil, last 3 days of talks over the different specificities and geographies involved. So, but I do have to run.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I'll see you all tomorrow. I'm going out for dinner. No more conference for me tonight. See you all tomorrow.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.